Hello, everyone. This is Patty with Dovetail Office Consulting KFT, coming to you from Hungary. I get a lot of requests for business English help tutoring. What is business English? Well, it depends on what business you're in or would like to be in. I have experience with legal work. I have experience with accounting. I have experience with engineering. I have also worked in churches, and my husband is a retired chef, so we have experience with the hospitality industry. So, what I've learned over the years is that every business has their own type of language. I work for a utility company, and we used a lot of acronyms that no one would understand outside of our company. And quite often, if you're speaking with a lawyer or a doctor, you might have to ask them to repeat what they say or say it a different way. I would go to the doctor sometimes and say, could you say that in plain English? Because doctors like to use those Latin words for all the medical terms. And I don't always know when they say my tibia has been injured, what that is. I'd have to go look it up, even though I did take biology in school a long time ago. Um, so when medical terms are used, sometimes I need to look them up. And I know a lot of words, but I don't know every single word. We have many, many words in the English language. So I help people with business English. I know a lot of legalese, words that lawyers use, and also not just the words they use, but what they mean. There's a big difference between the lawyer's fee and his costs. Most people don't know that. And so when the lawyer sends his bill and they say, I thought you weren't going to charge a fee. Oh, this is not my fee. These are my costs. These are the expenses I paid to help you out, the expenses I paid to get an expert witness. And so I recommend to people, if you're going to deal with a lawyer, learn some legal words and what they mean and read the fine print in the um, contract you're signing, no matter what it is. Ask about costs. And so I tell people that. And then there's the bookkeeping people who also have their own set of words they use, like profit and loss, balance statement, accrual versus cash basis. And that's something somebody needs to explain sometimes if they're doing your books for you. And whether or not you're making a profit. How do you know? There's sometimes there needs to be special reports to tell you that. And I also talk about, and you talk in finance about accountability. You should get your bookkeeper or financial advisor to give you regular reports on how your business is doing. Even if you don't really understand it, they need to be able to provide that information. So if there's ever a question, you have regular reports to go back to. And I give people advice on those kind of things, not just the jargon they need. I also have trained people when I've gone to work in an office on safety, because not a lot of people think about that. But when I worked for the telephone company, we had quarterly safety meetings, which were quite important to our business. And even an office person can get injured on the job if they trip and fall. So safety can be an important part of a successful business. So I've touched on those things. And of course, in the hospitality industry where my husband worked, the industrial part of that can be very dangerous. And it's quite a bit different than your home cooking in your small kitchen when you're working with big equipment and there's people running all around and sharp knives and lots of activity going on. If someone goes the wrong direction through a door, that can be a problem. So to understand the language of that industry is also a good idea if that's the business you're working in. But what if your business is selling and buying? Then you want the words that have to do with negotiating. And I say it's less about particular words and more about listening well, watching what ideas are presented and knowing what your bottom line is. That's one of those negotiating words. What can you afford to spend? What is a deal breaker? These are the kind of words people use when they're negotiating. But they don't always say those words, but they're thinking them. But you know what? We're all negotiating. I used to negotiate with small children because I had a couple of children and they were always wanting to do things. And my daughter especially would, can I go to a friend's house? Well, I can't take you there right now. What if her parents come and pick me up? Can you pick me up later? We would have this ongoing back and forth discussion about how that was going to take place. It was a negotiation. And then there was the negotiation about my first car. My husband and I went to this dealership. I already had an old car, but I wanted a new car. And I'd just gotten a really good job. So we sat down with this person and we were discussing the kind of car I wanted, what color I wanted, what kind of interior. And pretty much we were building a car because you could do that a long time ago. There was only one little problem. The salesman would not talk to me. He only spoke with my husband. He didn't know who he was negotiating with. So they built this beautiful sports car with four in the floor and mag wheels and sports mirrors and a spoiler on the back. And that thing looked like it could go in a race and win, but it wasn't my car. So finally, they get to the end, and my husband could see I was getting irritated with this salesperson who wouldn't talk to me, who would only answer David if I asked a question. My husband turns to me. What the salesperson didn't know is David didn't do money. And the sales guy was getting ready for this contract to be formalized. And my husband says, give me the checkbook, honey, because all he needed to do was write a check and then they would be on their way. And I said, I don't think so. And we rewrote that contract. I did buy the car, but that salesman learned that you don't always know who you're negotiating with. So it's a good idea to treat everyone with respect and be a good listener when you're negotiating and to find out who has the bottom line, who can make that deal. Where does the buck stop? That's an American idiom that means who's responsible for making the financial decision. Now, we decided things together, but ultimately I was the one that took care of the budget, so I would know whether or not we could afford something. So that's my little story about negotiating. But there's other business words. What about travel? Making itineraries, travel arrangements. I used to work for two wealthy businessmen, and I made all of their itinerary, including their doctor appointments, renting private planes, limousines. I even rented a 40-meter yacht one time. It was about 130 feet long with a full crew and for a week. And I found a pier where it could be docked. You don't dock those just anywhere. So that all came together and the trip was successful. On another occasion, I had to negotiate a new insurance policy for my boss. That took some months and a lot of planning. So, yes, I can teach people words about negotiating. And one the policies regarding that, and one of them is if you work with someone, whenever possible, you should call three vendors and learn from them the different ways they do things. I was very surprised to learn that real estate agents don't all handle your property the same way. I interviewed three agents one time and was sort of shocked at how different they were. One gentleman came in, talked to me for about 15 minutes about my house. He didn't make any positive or negative comments, and then he wanted to lower the price that I had in mind. I thanked him and he went on his way, and I hired someone else, someone who loved my house and felt like it was well worth my thoughts on it. So sometimes you need to be on the same page, and that goes for the medical profession. There was a time when I had a doctor ask me if I want a second opinion, and I said yes, I did. And he sent all his test results off, and We were at peace with each other, and I kept him as my doctor because I valued his opinion, but it was an opinion. And my favorite doctor said, we call it the practice of medicine because we're still practicing. It's the same with lawyers. They call it the practice of law. Sometimes you get a good one, and sometimes you get one that maybe is not quite as dedicated to your problem as you would like. So, folks, when you're learning business words, listen for those keywords. And here's my favorite expression that I learned from a lawyer. It's a very simple one. You ready for this? Or otherwise. My lawyer wanted me to put that in a contract one day, and I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "It means whatever I want it to mean." And I looked at him and I kind of winked and I said, "Is that your loophole?" And a loophole in a contract is how you can get out of the contract. Sure enough, that was his loophole. If you put that phrase in something, it can negate the whole thing. So it's important to know the jargon that the different professions are using to get around certain situations. So, folks, if you want to learn some business English and how to talk effectively, and more importantly, how to write, because it's very important sometimes to put things in writing in English so that you can confirm what is being said and have a written witness in an email or in a letter of what the communication was about, especially if you're dealing with a difficult person. This one person who was talking about narcissists said, "I put everything in writing." If they said, "Go get a cup of coffee," it would be, "Remember when you said, go get a cup of coffee, and I walked over there and then we continued our conversation?" Well, that seems a little bit anal, it's my opinion, but sometimes it's a good idea to put everything in writing. And I take notes for a business meeting. So I try to get the highlights and the good parts, but sometimes the little things that are said can make a big difference. One person's comment can change the whole picture of things. So listen well, put it on paper, and communicate better. And if anyone here listening wants to learn better business English, I'm happy to help with conversation as well as written business English. Thank you for listening. Bye bye for now.